Well, thanks for having me. I wanted to start with a founder's story, which I love. It's about my father. When he was 19 years old, with his best friend, he started a pizza restaurant, and it was called Two Nice Guys, and they were two nice guys, and they just loved making pizza, and they wanted to do it together. So they were in St. Louis, Missouri, and they created this firm. And the pizza restaurant started doing very, very well, and they needed to hire some wait staff, and they made one rule before they hired wait staff, which was they would not date any of the wait staff. And the first person they hired was my mother, and my father fell in love with her and said, I broke the rule. I need to leave the company. It's yours. And then 9 months later, I was born. But I think that really speaks to everything that we do in building companies, in that we just do what we love, and we have to make tough decisions every single day. That restaurant still exists today. It's called Pie Pizzeria in St. Louis, and the reason I found out about this was I got a tweet from the restaurant saying that they were using Square to sell pizzas on their mobile food truck, which was awesome how it just like all loops back around. So I've learned to focus on three things in building these two companies. The first is the importance of data. The second is the importance of details. And the third is the importance of editorial. So I'll just go through for the next 20 minutes comparing the two companies, and then open up to 10 minutes of questions afterwards. Data. When we started Twitter, we had no instrumentation at all. We had no sense of what the service was doing. We had no sense of what the users were doing, what they wanted to do. We didn't have any sense what the system itself was doing. We had no dashboard whatsoever. I know my COO at Square, Keith Raboy, came and talked yesterday afternoon, about the importance of dashboard, but that was not something I was considering at all. We weren't looking at any of the data coursing through our network, and effectively we were flying blind. So we were building this system, and we were building in a way that we thought made sense, but we were building it without any sort of light on terms of how people were actually using it. And what I found when we started building that was that we simply put some graphs in place, and we could see the pattern of usage, and we could see exactly where that pattern of usage was coming from, and we could start identifying and clarifying that bit of code that was being slow. We had a number of scalability issues in the early days of Twitter for the first year and a half, and a lot of them were because we didn't know what the system was doing. But the most important thing about having that data in front of the team was that it eased communication. It took all the friction out of communication because we had one place to look for everything that was happening within the system. And we had a lot of philosophical arguments and debates and speculation until we had that data in front of us. So a lot of our work was due to the fact that we couldn't communicate with each other. So the simplest tool that we built was an admin dashboard that allowed us to always refer to what was happening in the system and make decisions based off that. And that was something that was a huge lesson for me. It was the first thing I did at Square, even before we wrote any of the transaction processing system. Square is a payments company. Even before we wrote that, the first thing we wrote was the admin dashboard. And we have a principle within the company that we log everything, we test everything, and we measure everything. So every bit of code in the system is measured. Every bit of the code in the system and every action and every feature that we write has a visualization on it so that we can see instantly what's going on. The second thing that I learned in my tenure at Twitter early on was how much details matter. At Twitter, we started this in kind of a weird way. I joined a company called Odeo, which was a podcasting company. And I quickly learned that no one in the company actually wanted to be working on podcasting tools. And none of us were podcasters. And we were joining because we wanted to work with each other. But we had no passion whatsoever for the tool that we were actually building or for the users that we were building this for, which is big red flag. So what we did was we realized that we wanted to work together and we wanted to work on some ideas together. So we went out and we considered some other ideas, and I had an idea that I'd been thinking about since I was about 14 years old, which I brought up because the timing was just right, because SMS was coming out. And we were using SMS in the company constantly, and we were thinking about group communication, and the two just fit together. And the idea was use SMS as a way to be anywhere in the world, type out a quick message, and it's broadcast out to all the people that might care about it. So people could follow those messages in real time. They would be delivered on your phone, and you could type them out from your phone anywhere you are. And it was a very simple idea. It was kind of a stretch for an audio company to go to completely text-based, but it made sense because of the team that we had. But we started working on it, and we didn't really pay attention to any of the details of the interface, of the user experience, of the verbs in the system, of the logo, of the name. All of these things were fairly reactionary, and we kind of just went with it. We would build a piece and then get some feedback, and then build another piece and get more feedback on that. But there was no cohesive vision for really looking at every single one of the details and making a cohesive picture. And that was a big mistake because it allowed for a lot of sloppiness. And it set a tone for sloppiness in the entire company, from engineering to support to design. There just wasn't a focus on every single detail of what we're doing. So with Square, the first thing that we did was, first of all, we realized that we're working with people's money. So when you're working with people's money, especially other people's money, the details really matter. And you have no room for any sort of imprecision there. So the first thing that we did was we hired the best iPhone developer that we could find, who had been working on systems that were just made gorgeous. He was working on games, in fact. And games have a very particular feeling to them because everyone pays attention to every single detail of the gameplay, or that at least that is true for the best games. So from day one, right after we wrote that admin dashboard and we started looking at the data, we focused on making a beautiful interface and paying attention to every single detail of that interface. And we would agonize over every aspect of what we were building. And we did a lot of things that I think normally one would ignore just to get the product out, but we couldn't ignore because we wanted a beautiful end-to-end experience. And the danger here is that there's a lot of details when you're building something. So you do need to focus on every single one of those details we found, but at the same time you need to limit the number of details. And early on in both Twitter and in Square, there were thousands of things that we could be doing, but only one or two that really moved the needle and moved the product forward. And in Twitter's case, we were a little bit looser about the number of details that we said yes to. And we kind of took in everything, and it really cost us in terms of uptime. Because we were doing so much, we didn't have a good pacing around what the story we were telling the world. And that allowed for a lot of interactions that we weren't expecting. And we didn't have any sort of calculation with, at the same time, having no data around to measure its success or failure. So in Square's case, we said no to a lot. We focused on doing one thing, which was accepting credit cards from your mobile phone. And that one thing proved to be a whole heck of a lot to do because we had to build hardware and we had to fulfill hardware, and then we had to figure out the whole credit card system, and then we had to go to places like Visa who would tell us this is a very interesting idea, but we'll get back to you in 6 months. And then we found out that it was completely against their rules, so we had to figure out how to rewrite their rules. But all of these things were the details that really focused that one product and made that one product successful. Instead of looking at the 1,000 things that we could be doing, like getting into restaurants or doing a mobile wallet right away or building a way to read checks from the camera, which is a request we got a lot. So there was a lot of ideas, but we had to be really good editors in terms of what we were actually building into the system. And that is the third big thing that I learned, is that a lot of my role I see as editorial. And by that I mean there's two ways to be an editor. The first is to collect a corpus of stories, 1,000 stories, and edit them down to one or two that really matter and that are really powerful to drive the product forward into the world. The second way to be an editor is to notice intersections of technology and assign teams to figure out what's going on there. So in particular, at Square, we wanted to find out what was going on with the receipt and what was going on with the point of sale, and we assigned a team to figure out point of sale, what does that mean for Square? Accepting cash for a credit card acceptance company, what does that mean? And that proved to be a very, very easy way to operate that aspect. And as CEO, I think I have 3 priorities in terms of that editorial. Number one is money in the bank, and that's through investment or through a revenue story. Need to have a support structure that people can rely on so that we can build what we want to build in the world. Twitter, obviously, early on did not have a revenue model, and that revenue model is still being developed, but it did have a lot of investor interest, and it was very easy to tell a good story and to show the network aspect of it. Square, on the other hand, has a natural revenue model, but some other models that we want to figure out, some models that are not as tangible immediately, and that rely on intangibles like the electronic receipt that we think will take us even further apart from the revenue models that being a transactional company provide. The second priority is the team. And this is something that I learned between the two companies. Just to put them in perspective, in 2 years, two and a half years, Twitter had 20 people working for it. In 2.5 years, Square is now at 130 people. And one of the things that I learned in retrospect is we didn't hire fast enough at Twitter. And a lot of that was just trying to figure out who the best people were, not having confidence in those decisions. And also I learned it was based on the fact that we didn't let people go early enough. And this, I think, is a big issue for most startups, is typically they're very quick to fire, but very slow to fire. Quick to hire, slow to fire. And we had a number of people within the company in the early days of Twitter that if we parted ways earlier, it would have unblocked the entire company for more hires. And a lot of this was just negative elements within the team. And I learned very, very quickly in developing Square that you have to remove the negative elements from the team and from the company as quickly as you identify them. It's the most important thing for that team cohesion. And once we did that at Twitter, it unblocked everything so that we could start hiring. And I had no idea that would happen. So at Square, we were very, very aggressive about hiring the people that we wanted to hire, but also about recognizing every single moment the people that didn't make sense to continue with. And we've asked about 5 people to leave at Square, and all of them have been transformational in order to bring more people in. And that's been something that took me a long time to realize, but also something that obviously is always one of the hardest things to do. The third big part of editorial for me is telling a good story. And this works in 2 ways. First, the internal story. Internal communication and the internal structure that we create at the company allows it to self-sustain, allows everyone to align. And there's nothing more important than aligning together as one company and moving forward as one company. Early days of Twitter, we had really bad communication. We barely talked to each other. We had a lot of the knowledge of the system in one person's head, who was stressed out all the time and was carrying the weight of the world with them, which was just a terrible feeling. And we just were not communicating with each other on what was wrong and what was successful and where we needed to go. And it's funny because we weren't communicating internally, we also weren't communicating externally. We were going down nearly every day for 2 minutes to even sometimes 4 hours at a time, and leaving our users in the dark completely. And what's funny about this is we were building a communications company, and we were building a communications platform. And the whole goal of our platform and of our service was to encourage transparency in the world. And yet, we weren't being transparent with each other, and yet we weren't being transparent with the world about what was happening. So at some point, we realized this, and we focused on 2 things: bettering the internal communication and bettering the external communication. But we have to start internally. So internally, we started with a practice called pair programming. And we hired a firm called Pivotal Labs. And we got a bunch of programmers, and they're agile programmers. It's a methodology in programming where you move very, very fast. You work on what are called user stories. You track everything. And there's this practice of pair programming where there's 2 people, 2 programmers to 1 computer. And this looks odd when you first see it because you have these you have 2 keyboards and you have 2 mice and you have 2 people looking at 1 monitor. And one has the controls and one is typing the code and the other is giving critique or giving direction or questioning. And what's really interesting about this is that first, it vocalizes the problems. So people are actually talking about our problems, and other people around the company can hear what's going on. And just that act alone allowed us to spread the information and spread the patterns of failure that we were working on and trying to correct. The second thing that it does is that it pushes the load across 2 people. So when the site goes down, it's not just on one person's shoulder, it's a shared responsibility. And we also rotated these pairs. So one person would be working on the code and they would have a pair, and then we would rotate that person out and put another person in. So suddenly we went from one person knowing the code base to a team of 9 people knowing the code base because they're all working together and switching in and out on different things. And the way I think about this now is this is very similar to flying a plane. When you're flying a jet, you have a pilot and you have a co-pilot. And if you watch them, one of them will be holding the wheel and the controls, and when they're ready to transfer over, they say hands off, and then the other one takes the wheel. And that's exactly what we're doing with pair programming, and that's exactly the sort of attitude we needed to build a service, because we have millions of users dependent on it. And especially in Square's case, not only do we have millions of users dependent on it, but we have other people's money that we're moving around. So it's critical that we're very precise and that we do that right, and we're reading the instruments in front of us, and we're also watching the horizon. So pair programming was a huge step forward for us in improving the internal communication. And it started with the engineers, but then it moved around the company. So every single decision that we made would include a pair or include a collaboration of many people. So this was from the business standpoint, from raises, from design, from considerations around partners. We just really took this extremely collaborative practice and spread it throughout the entire company. Externally, we started blogging. We started talking about exactly what was happening with the system. And we were very frank. We wrote a blog post that said, we have no idea why the system is going down right now. There are so many moving parts to it, and we can't figure it out. But we have people on it who are taking it piece by piece and ripping it apart and figuring out every single detail and improving each one of those details, which then uncovers a new problem, which we're then fixing. And that alone, just showing what we were doing and the problems that we were encountering, gave our users a lot more empathy for what we were doing. But the most important thing was it brought them in. It brought them into the development of the system, and it made them feel ownership immediately. So a lot of practices came out of this, especially internally. We started a weekly all hands called Tea Time, which we modeled after Google, TGIF, thank God it's Friday, where the whole company gets together and we talk about our metrics, we talk about what we launched, we talked about where we could be better, and then we kind of wrap it up with a vision for where we're going next. And we did that every single Friday at 4 p.m. We did the same thing at Square from day one, and we called it Town Square. And we again went through our metrics. We introduced new people to the company because we were moving at a much faster pace, and we were bringing people on every single week. We would go through everything that we launched. We would go through everything that we could do better, and then we would wrap it up with a piece on where we're going. And we added one critical element, which I think has helped us a lot, which we opened up Q&A. So we have a Google moderator panel, and we enable every single employee in the company to ask any question they want of the company, of management, of our direction, of our choices, of other people in the company, and they can do so with their name, or they can do it anonymously. And we allow them to vote up or down, and we take the top 3 questions, and we answer all those in front of the entire company. And it's been extremely, extremely useful. Because first, the questions that don't get answered barometer on how the company is doing and how the people consider the company. But number one, the questions that do get answered, it's a venue for correcting a lot of misperceptions about what management is thinking or where the company is going, and also just clarifying what we're doing in a very specific way. And all these questions have a very similar theme, and they all point to communication that we could be doing better. And it's a constant reminder of that communication and how we could be doing better. So that Town Square element has been huge in terms of communication for Square, which is one of the companies that needs it the most. We are literally doing 8 different things. We're building hardware. We're fulfilling hardware. We're building a service that needs to stay up 100% of the time, because if we go down, we lose money for one of our users. We're building clients. We're building customer support. We're building risk and fraud. And we're building a whole payments network. So all of these things have to be done in a tightly coordinated fashion. So we focused a lot of energy on the structure of communication and making sure that everyone is stepping together as one unit. Town Square is one key element of that. But another thing that we do is every single meeting that has more than 2 people in it, that's not absolutely confidential, someone in that meeting takes notes. They send it to an alias within the company, notes@squareup.com, and it goes out to the entire company. So the whole company can see every single thing in development and get a sense for everything that's going on just by following this alias. So it does a few things. First, it gives them a sense of exactly the decisions that are being made in real time. Secondly, it gives them confidence that they don't need to be in every single meeting, and that they can focus on their work and not worry about what this person is saying in that meeting, or what's happening over here. It just gives a confidence of everything's okay. I have a sense of everything that's going on. If there's a detail that I have a question about, I know exactly who to talk to because it's in all of these notes. So very, very detailed about what we push out internally so that we can have effortless communication and so that we can really focus on what's most important, which is building the product up. And all of this structure that I just talked about is so that we can minimize the friction of working together, which is what kills a lot of development, kills a lot of creativity, kills a lot of what we all love about startups and building these companies, is all the friction of just figuring out how to work together as humans. So Keith and I spend at Square a lot of time just setting up that structure, and he's been instrumental in first making sure that we're watching the right numbers and watching the right metrics, and secondly, that based on those numbers, we have the right communication structure set up so that we can focus on the creative aspects of what we're doing and actually building the products and building the details and focusing on those details. So with that, I wanted to open it up to questions and talk about anything you want. Thank you.
You talked about letting people go at Square, and I was wondering, how do you handle communicating those decisions to the rest of the company, if at all, and using that as a learning experience for how you hire new people?
It really depends on the person. We had some cases where they were early team members, like in the first 5, and those, of course, are a lot more embedded and touchy. So in that particular case, I had a conversation with this person, and it really came down to timing. And in any relationship, it needs to work out for both parties, and it was obvious that it wasn't working out for both of us. So we just had to part ways. And we had a very civil conversation, lasted about an hour. It was in the morning. And then immediately afterwards, I gathered the whole company and said that we let this person go. It was for these 3 reasons. And overall, the timing just didn't make sense. And we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we're setting him up for success in the future. Here's his email address. He wants to talk to you. So feel free. And that communication took about 5 to 7 minutes. But really making sure that we are very clear about the reasons that we're parting ways. And then also that there's an opening for more conversation if anyone else has concerns. But it's also a time, as you alluded to really focus on what we're looking for and bringing people in. And every hire we make also should have some success data around it and metrics around it of what we're watching. Retention is a big thing, and retention on our part, but also people leaving the company. Did we make the right choice in that hire? Are we setting up the company and the structure for success for that person? And can we isolate those so we can get the best data around it? So every single hire and every single person that we let go, we collect a lot of data around so that we make sure that we know how to improve that hiring in the future, and especially if we ever have to let anyone go again, how to exit them in the right way.
This is related to really the question that just got asked, but could you maybe talk a little bit more about how you identify when a hire whom you've had high hopes for initially starts to become a negative element, and that transition to where maybe they're not working out in the way that you expected?
I think so. In the early days of Twitter, there wasn't enough communication about that. And I think more than anything else, in my role and in any leadership role within the company, there has to be a strong effort on coaching. And one of the things I'm proudest of in Square is that our director of engineering and 7 of our engineering managers were all promoted internally. And we spent a lot of effort in coaching them and stretching them to a place where they really took on more effort and really sought out advice, sought out mentorship, and really learned a lot. And that came because we were constantly talking about where the company needed to go, and if they wanted to be a leader within this company, what they would have to do that. So when we recognize a negative element within Square over the past 2 years, we would just have a very open and frank conversation. This is what we're seeing. This is what other people are seeing. There needs to be a correction here. If there's no correction, we need to talk again. And 2 weeks later, same conversation. Nothing's changing. You know, we're watching this and we're not fixing anything. So, you know, that we're going to have to make a decision here. And then, you know, 2 weeks after that, nothing has changed. This is not a surprise. We're getting the same feedback. You know, we're not going in a different direction. And at that point, for both parties, it's just a natural conclusion. And no firing, no letting go should ever come as a surprise to anyone, because there should be a history of communication and a history of learning of what was good and also what could have been improved. And if there is any surprise, then I take it as a failure of myself in not giving the information in real time to that employee and not coaching them in the right way.
Players.
The question is, what's the hiring process and how do we identify the best players? At Square, we've been very, very fortunate in that we've had a number of people just come to us organically, and we recognize immediately that they're awesome for the company. I think my favorite interview question to ask when I first talk to a candidate is, why are you here? And the answer that they give back in the instant is pretty illustrative. In some cases, they'll give back, well, you know, I was scheduled for an interview and you have a meeting with me. I don't know, like, what do you want from me? Or they'll say that the best candidates will say, because I love Square for this reason, my mother uses it, but I want to fix this, this, and this. And they just have an immediate vision of how they're inserting themselves into the company and how they're working with the company. And then the entire conversation unfolds around that. So I immediately want to see passion and love for the product that we're building and the company that we're building it at. And if I see that, and I see that with some skill and with a vision forward, in not only in what we're building, but also their own career, then it's a good hire. But if we don't see that, then it's not someone that we talk to anymore at all. And that's been pretty accurate in terms of getting great people. Keith, my COO at Square, is amazing at just recognizing talent, and he does so from Quora, from blogs, from Twitter, from his network, from various functions of the companies that he has friends at, and he just tells the story. And tells the story of Square, and he does so in a very passionate way. And he carries this device around, and he charges anyone that he can, get their credit card out. And from that, you get a lot of that resonance. And if you see equal passion, then we bring them in. And one of the things that we really like to do is we have most of our recruiting and interviews on weekends. So on a Saturday or a Sunday, where the day is completely free of all the tactical. Saturday and Sundays are usually just purely strategic and really, really creative. We bring a lot of our folks in, and we do a 1-2 hour interview. But it's a relaxed environment, and we really get a sense of their passion and also, in some cases, of their skill. Because another way that we interview engineers, which I think is really interesting, and I would love to see more companies do, is we put them through a pairing session. So the engineer comes in, sits down with one of our senior engineers. We have a standard problem that we're working through. They both sit at the same computer, and our senior engineer says, we're working on this problem, love to see you program it. So they start coding it, and then the senior engineer will correct every now and then, but it goes back and forth for about 2 hours. And we immediately get a sense of, A, that they can program, and what it's like working with them. which is huge, and minimizes the number of people that we have to let go, because we have a strong confidence of those two really important factors for the company. So we've put a lot of thought into hiring. We just hired a director of staffing to really concretely bring this around the company, not just for engineering, but for every single hire we do, so we can move much, much faster. We're 130 today. We want to be 200, 220 by the end of the year. And a lot of that is making sure that we continue to get the right people and the best people across every single function of the company. But also, it's also looking at the people that we have and making sure that we're editing the team in the right way.
Wish him well.
Thank you.